Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over 1984, the first episode, official first episode of 1984, going over Chapter 1, Part 1, so the first 20 pages of this. Super excited. Thank you guys so much for watching, listening, subscribing, and I am, like I said, very excited to go on this journey with anybody who is willing to listen. But no, I'm happy to go on this journey, even if it is just me, because I've heard so much about this book. So let's just get started. Chapter 1, Part 1. George Orwell wastes no time introducing us to our main character. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say he's the main character. We're going to get to know him more. He's going to be with us throughout the rest of the book. And that's Winston Smith. We're introduced to him right within the first few lines. Winston is trying to get out of the cold. And he's going in and out of buildings. And we come to find out, well, he's actually trying to get back to his place of residence. I don't want to call it a house. It's more like an apartment, it sounds like, because there's other people living in there. I kind of took a look ahead at Part 2. There's somebody, he has like a neighbor that's like across the hall. So it sounds like an apartment. What do we know about Winston Smith? And this is kind of what the blog post will be about, that is also out, and I'll include a link in the description. But Winston is 39 years old, he says. He has a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, which is interesting. He mentions it a few times. It might be an important thing throughout the rest of the story. He dresses like the rest of the party, which is blue overalls. So seemingly all the guys, maybe even all the girls, dress alike. So there's no real fashion sense to this guy. But then again, there's no fashion. It doesn't seem like there's any fashion sense to anybody else that he has mentioned so far in this first part. Seems like everybody kind of wears the same stuff. Winston works at the Ministry of Truth in the Records Department. And this Ministry of Truth is this huge, pristine building. It seems like it kind of towers over the rest of London. And that's where this story takes place, in London, Oceania, which is kind of interesting. Not London, England, London, UK, Oceania, which I think of Australia. So that was kind of weird to me, but it is a work of fiction, and, it's a story. There's other ministries too. We'll talk about that coming up. Winston can't really remember his childhood. That is what I get into in the blog post about time, memory. Winston doesn't really have a sense of time. What I mean by that is, we're going to come to find out he doesn't really know what date it is, and he can't really remember his childhood. He has an interesting book, a diary, which is blank, but we're going to find out it's no longer going to be blank. So we'll find that out a little bit later. What is the setting? Like I said, London, Oceania. It's very cold. I don't know if that's due to it being always cold, or just the season, the time and season. It's cold, but then in other months it's warm. He describes it as a grimy landscape. And actually he has other words to describe it. It seems very run down. Very run down. This was on page 3. There's more descriptions of it, where there are always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with balks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard, and their roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all directions, and the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air and the willow herb straggled over the heaps of rubble. It honestly sounds like I write right there, it sounds like a war zone. It sounds like a war zone. And you have this huge ministry, like I said, pristine. I think he even mentioned that it was white, I think. Kept ministry to this place of work towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. So this really, really nice building, and everything else is like peasants, basically. Like it's just grimy. It's gray. It's dark. It feels like that. But then again, you have this huge building that he works at that's pristine, sounds clean, way more up to date, looks way nicer. So you kind of got to wonder how much control, how much money is being put into this ministry, and why is everything else not as pristine? It's kind of what I'm wondering. What is happening? What is happening? Well, like I said, Winston comes home. He gets out of the cold, climbs up some stairs. This is where we learn about his ulcer, that it's kind of bothering him. And what is following him along the way but a poster of a middle-aged mustached man, he says. And this poster has eyes that seemingly follow Winston with a caption on it that says, "Big Brother is watching you." And he notes this as he's climbing up to his apartment. He notes it. He also notes that it's in other areas too. It seems like this poster is everywhere, seemingly everywhere. And who is Big Brother? We don't really know much about it yet. Sounds like it's a singular person. Doesn't really have like a formal name. That's just referred to as Big Brother throughout the rest of this part one. Inside his home, Big Brother has other ways of keeping an eye on him. Namely, Winston mentions a telescreen. So this telescreen can see and hear him. So basically having like a security camera, closed caption in the corner of his house that can record his sound and movements. It's kind of interesting. Okay. Very interesting. Page 6 is where we get to the book. And the book, there's a distinction here because there's another book that is seemingly like the manuscript for the Brotherhood led by Emmanuel Goldstein, which we're going to talk about. But this other book is his diary. And he buys it from a junk shop on the free market, describes it as smooth, that's a typo, creamy paper, a little yellowed by age. And it's a very compromising possession because just by the fact of buying it, he could be charged or he could be punished by it because you're not actually, where he buys it, you're not supposed to go out and shop at those shops. You're specifically only supposed to buy from stores that are, I guess, government sanctioned. And this shop that he was at was not really sanctioned. It's on the free market, he says, and he tries to conceal it. He goes in and out really fast. He's checking the streets, he says. So he's trying to keep it a secret, right? He doesn't really want it known that he has this beautiful book, and he's planning on using it as a diary. And he says just the fact that he opened up the diary, just the fact that he bought the book is just punishable, even without writing anything in it yet. He says it's punishable by death or at least 25 years in a labor camp, a forced labor camp. And I find it interesting, too, here. What was I going to say? Punishable by death. Oh, he mentions that there's no laws in Oceania, yet they're going to punish him, right? Right, this is page 6. Down at the bottom, I remember, nothing was illegal since there was no longer any laws, but if detected, it was reasonably certain that it would be punished by death. So it's kind of funny. Nothing's illegal. There's no laws, but we'll still punish you. So that's kind of like what is that? like not a catch-22, but it doesn't make sense, right? There's no laws, but we'll punish you. So the only law is what Big Brother says, is kind of what I'm getting there. Whatever Big Brother says, that's the law. But we don't have any laws. It's just kind of whatever I say goes, because we're not going to write this stuff down, because what if someday whatever we write down in our law book, in our constitution or whatever, then maybe then that can be used against me. But if we don't have anything written down and the law just comes down from me, well, then whatever I say goes. Just kind of thinking about like how Big Brother thinks about these things. I'm sure we're going to talk more about this later. Winston is not used to writing things by hand. And he says this, he mentions that the pen that he has is an archaic instrument. After he finishes writing in his journal, writing his journal entry, or his diary entry, he actually cramps up. I don't think he's used to writing a lot, because any dictation he mentions is done in the speakwrite. So anything you want to note down, you say into this speakwrite. But think about this, and maybe this is why this diary is so punishable, and I talk about this in the blog post, is the diary is concealed. He's keeping it secret. The speakwrite, I'm going to venture out and guess. I'm going to just venture out and guess that the speakwrite is not just for him. Just like the telescreen in his room is recording him, seemingly 24/7 or whenever he's in the apartment, the speakwrite, they want you, Big Brother wants you to note everything in there, because they can have access to that. They have access to the speakwrite. So that's why the diary is punishable, because potentially you can conceal that, write down your thoughts, express yourself, and then share that with others. That's probably why they came after Goldstein and his book. Can't even find a copy of it. No, they want to keep track of you. They got the telescreen, speakwrite. Hey, you want to note anything down? Hey, cool. Put it in a speakwrite. So we can hear it too and make sure that you are towing the party line, as they say. Let's continue on page 8. Winston begins to write. Is this impromptu, I ask there, and I say no. It seems like Winston has planned this. He's had the diary, I think, for some time. It even states that for like a few weeks, right here on page 8, for weeks past, he had been making ready for this moment, and it had never crossed his mind that anything would be needed except courage. He's talking about writing in the diary. He's planned this out for a while. This is a big deal. He doesn't really write that much, and he knows that just by buying the diary, he's walking on eggshells here. So this is a huge deal. He starts to get like a lot of anxiety about it. You can kind of tell his ulcer actually mentions that again. It starts to act up on him. And there's just a lot of angst here. You can feel it in how Orwell is describing the situation. But he begins to write, and it's interesting that when he begins to write, he starts off with the date, which was April 4th, I think. April 4th, 1984. And he mentions he doesn't even know if that's the right date. So think about that. He doesn't even know if April 4th, 1984 is the right date. And then he talks about how he doesn't even know what age he is. He says he thinks he was born in 44 or 45, 1944 or 45. But he can't really remember. Earlier in this chapter, we see that he can't really remember his childhood. He's trying to remember if London was always as grimy. He says he can't remember it. And now he can't even remember the date. So keep that in mind, and I talk about this in the blog post. Time and memory. Winston doesn't have a sense of time, and he doesn't have a lot of memory. And I wonder, a couple questions, is that everybody? Is that just Winston? Is that by his doing? How does that even happen? Or is that by somebody else's doing, perhaps Big Brother's? So like I mentioned, continuing forward, Winston begins to write and he begins to cramp up because he just splashes down, just a whole splashdown of ideas. And he writes a ton, just super fast, just get the ideas down while they're still fresh in his head. And what he writes down is he's depicting a night of war films, horrifying movies being shown, with horrifying things happening to people. And he notes that the audience is pretty entertained by it. They get an applause, except for one lady who speaks out against it. She doesn't like it being shown. And he notes that the police come and take her away. And he calls her a prole. Not really sure what a prole means yet, but he calls that lady a prole, and it says it's a typical prole response. So I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that entry. Like if you were to speak that in the speakwrite, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He's just noting what happened during the day. So I don't know. But the fact that he has the diary, again, punishable. But if you were to take that diary entry and put it in the speakwrite, I don't really think there's anything punishable by that. He's not saying anything against the party, nothing negative. He's just, that's what happened. I don't know. After he finishes that little writing, the couple paragraphs, cramps up, and he remembers back earlier in the day on his work day at the records department. So he comes home from work, he does the diary entry, and then he reflects back on what happened earlier that day. We meet two other characters. One of them, we don't know the name. It's a girl, seemingly works in the fiction department of the Ministry of Truth. And again, Winston works in the records department. Postulates that the girl has a mechanical job on the novel writing machines. She looks very bold. She's younger than him, about 27. She's part of the anti-sex league. And he has a lot of uneasiness about her. He doesn't really like her. It doesn't seem like he talks to her. He kind of wants to stay away from her because he thinks maybe she's an agent of the thought police. So another key word there, thought police. So it's almost like he's very apprehensive to get to know her because what we're going to find out is Winston has some ideas in his head that have been sloshing around up there. And, like for example, he bought a diary. Right? This is something that he wants to keep to himself and conceal. He's probably not going to want to tell this girl about it. He has an uneasiness about her. Okay. The other character is O'Brien, member of the inner party, which Winston describes as basically O'Brien is kind of higher up member of the party. He's maybe closer to Big Brother than he is Winston. Yeah. He's a larger guy. He's got a prize fighter's physique. So pretty big, strong guy. But he has a charm of a manner. So when I asked the question here, does he act the way he looked? Well, not really. Because he seems like quite a nice, again, has a lot of charm, yet he's super big and imposing, but he seems like he's a super nice guy. So, but he's not like a bully. Winston does not describe him like that. And he has the appearance of being a person you could talk to. Okay, interesting. So the girl doesn't want to talk to. The guy seems like he could share some things with him. Next, we get into the 2 minutes of hate. The 2 minutes of hate is this event where everybody has to watch the screen, multiple screens, I'm sure, but it's broadcasted, I'm sure, throughout Oceania. And it's basically a period where you are taught to hate this guy, Emmanuel Goldstein. You are taught to love Big Brother and hate the enemy, is what the 2 minutes of hate is. Just basic description. And what happens during the 2 minutes of hate? Well, people gather around and watch. It starts off with this face of this guy Winston calls Emmanuel Goldstein. And Emmanuel Goldstein was once a leading figure of the party, but ended up being a counter-revolutionary and spoke out against the party. And he escapes and disappears years ago, probably because he was a wanted man. So what is Goldstein really, why was he a counter-revolutionary? Why was he maybe labeled like this? Well, what did he speak out against the party? What exactly did he disagree with the party on? There we go. Goldstein speaks about freedom of the press, assembly, freedom of thought. He wants peace with Eurasia, and this is another country or continent, what have you. So he's speaking out against the party with these ideas. And it's interesting how the 2 minutes of hate links up his ideas with these soldiers marching to his speech patterns. So it's kind of like, hey, they're basically linking his thoughts with violence. His actions against the party and violence, soldiers marching to his speech pattern. He eventually turns into a sheep, like it's talked about that the face of a sheep appears, and people are getting in a frenzy about this. They start shouting. They start really, it's a period where you openly but you openly shout hate at this guy, Emmanuel Goldstein. And I think it's just to keep your mind on who the enemy is. Keep your mind on who the enemy is and what the enemy's ideas are. And people are loving it. Hating it. They're shouting, throwing things at the screen. Winston even joins in too. He says it's kind of impossible not to join in with it. You just get all worked up in a frenzy. Winston even starts to think he hates other things too. He directs his hate from Goldstein to Big Brother. He diverts it to that young girl that we mentioned on the last slide. The 2 minutes of hate ends with a soldier enters the picture, and then at the very end, Big Brother appears and speaks some things, words of encouragement, there to console. You can kind of tell the people get less rowdy. I think one lady, actually I gotta check this, because I think one lady actually cries and like goes up to the screen, is like in tears. She's moved by the appearance of Big Brother. So the 2 minutes of hate, I think, has one objective: show you who you're supposed to hate and show you who you're supposed to love, basically. Goldstein, the ideas that Goldstein had, you hate. Big Brother is going to come in. He's going to console you, encouragement. Yeah, he's watching over you. That's who you should love. Let's go to the next slide, because here's where we learn a little bit more about the Brotherhood. This is the group that Goldstein led, described as a shadowy network of conspirators, people that went against the party. And Goldstein wrote down his ideas, his teachings in the book. So to contrast that with the book that Winston refers to, which is his diary. But the Brotherhood did not just go away, because, again, they never captured Goldstein. Nobody knows where he is. So there's kind of thoughts that, hey, this might have went underground. And the book that is mentioned, the book, is still alive and well and still maybe possibly being circulated on the underground. But obviously punishable if you read it, punishable if you partake in some of Goldstein's ideas. So that's why all of this is underground. Nobody really talks about it. Nobody really knows. We don't really know any other information about Goldstein yet. One of the last things that is shown in the 2 Minutes of Hate is, I'm pretty sure it's this. 3 slogans of the party. Yep, stood out, bold capitals. This is like kind of at the very, very end of the 2 Minutes of Hate, towards the end at least. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. The 3 slogans of the party, the 3 slogans of Big Brother. And I'm sure we're going to see this many, many times in this book. Many, many times. As you can see, it's even on the back cover of my copy, at least. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So self-hypnosis, after the 2 Minutes of Hate, like I said, they go from being worked up in a frenzy to now being hypnotized, consoled by Big Brother. Now they're put to rest. This is all described on page 17. They end up doing like a rhythmic chant, which Winston describes as heavy, murmurous sounds, somehow curiously savage. Everybody's doing it, right? And it's impossible, again, just like Winston joined in with the 2 Minutes of Hate, this is impossible not to chant with the rest of the people. Quote, the quote down there, what is that? The 5th bullet point. To do what everyone else was doing was an instinctive reaction. Yelling and throwing things at the screen when you see Goldstein, and then chanting this murmur thing at the end of the 2 Minutes of Hate. You just go along with everybody else. No time to think what you want to do. You just go along with everybody else. This is interesting. During this, he catches O'Brien's eye for a split second, and it's a look. Like somehow like people give you a look and you know what they're talking about. Like I remember there was a 60 Minutes with Tom Brady, and they were out on the field, and he said just by looking at his receivers a certain way, I think he had like Deion Branch out there, just by looking at Deion knew what route to run. It's like they give you a look. O'Brien's giving him a look like, and here's what I think the look describes. Hey, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're feeling. I know you're asking questions. I have the same questions. And I think this is all bullshit. I think that's what O'Brien is. They communicated there for a second. Obviously, they have to be careful and not talk to each other. But Winston says he knows O'Brien knows what he's thinking. Just in that split second. You can kind of tell. I think in a world like Oceania, where everybody seemingly dresses the same, thinks the same, they all hate Goldstein, they all are consoled by Big Brother. When you see something like this, just like a little catch of the eye, like a little look, it really stands out. So I kind of get where Winston is coming from here. It's a very unique thing because everybody else is acting the same. So I wonder how this relationship with O'Brien is going to pan out here. I'm really curious because it sounds like O'Brien has similar thoughts that Winston has. And what are those thoughts? Well, he buys a diary. He's going against the party. Right? Here's the other thing too, is he writes the diary in an area of the room where the telescreen can't see. So he's trying to conceal. He doesn't want anybody to know and know that he's writing down his thoughts. And here's the other thing too, is he goes back to the diary. We go back to the diary, and it's found out on page 19 he was caught in like this weird trance from thinking about back earlier in the day about the 2 Minutes of Hate, that he ends up writing down these words, Down with Big Brother. So this is what he thinks O'Brien knows about too. This is what I think is communicated in that really short glance with O'Brien. Down with Big Brother. It seems like Winston is getting fed up. And obviously he can't talk to just anybody about it. Because, as is stated here, the thought police will come for him. And the thought police will come for him even if he hadn't written anything down because of his thought crime. He didn't have to write it down. It seems like the thought police can know what your thoughts are. So you were thinking that this down with Big Brother before you even wrote it down. So they're going to know. They're going to come for you at any time. Make you disappear. They call it vaporized. There's no trial for it. No, they just come and take you. And that's kind of scary. So I'm really, really curious on the relationship between Winston and Big Brother, or Winston O'Brien, and how that develops. And if O'Brien is really thinking the same things that Winston has written down just now. Because after he writes this down, he gets a knock at the door. This is on page 20. And Winston gets a little scared here because he's just written down with Big Brother. He just said the thought police could come for him at any time. Usually they come in the night. He says they'll take you in your sleep, but this is really quick. Who's at the door? And that's where we leave. That's where we leave it off at for part one. Next slide. I just had some vocabulary words here because there's a lot of terminology in this first part, like speakwrite. Did you guys notice that mansion, cigarettes, gin all have the word victory in front of them? Like he's smoking and drinking gin while he's writing in the diary. And he calls them victory cigarettes, victory gin. He notes in the very first page that this is hate week and that all power has been decreased. So that's why he couldn't take the elevator. There wasn't enough electricity. Electricity is being diverted to hate week. There's the 2 minutes of hate. There's the ministries of truth, love, peace, and plenty. Right? He works at the ministry of truth, but there's these other 3 ministries. Big Brother, ingsoc. That was a really interesting word. I think he noted that it was on a poster. Very interesting. I don't know what that means. The party of Big Brother, the telescreen that's recording his movements and sounds, basically like a camera. The thought police, who can arrest for thought crimes, just for thinking things. Newspeak, which he mentions that the ministries of truth in Newspeak would be mini-true. So Newspeak is like a whole nother language, it seems like. Doublethink. Proles, he mentions that woman from the first part of his diary entry is a prole. And the book of Goldstein. What other ideas are in that book? So lots of vocabulary terms thrown at us in this first part. I almost think like I should do a blog post just to like define these things, just so we don't get confused. But just some things I noted, and maybe I even missed some there. Let me know if I missed some. And the last slide, some questions for next time and some things to think about. And I think one or two of these I explore in the blog post. Winston has trouble remembering things. Is this out of personal forgetfulness or something bigger? Why do you suppose some things are prefixed with victory? Interesting, right? The party wants you to use a speakwrite instead of writing down your thoughts. Why? What are your thoughts on the apparent disregard for time? Describe Winston's emotions and thoughts while writing in his diary. Compare and contrast how people feel seeing Goldstein versus seeing Big Brother during the 2 minutes of hate. So for next time, we'll have a video just on these discussion questions, and then we'll do another video for part 2. Part 2 is going to be, what, page 20 to 38. Or, nope. Oh, it's going to be a little bit shorter than that. Hold on. Let me get this for you guys. There we go. Page 20 to 30. So only 10 pages. So only 10 pages for next time. Guys, thank you very much. Ooh, this was a doozy. A lot of details in here. We're going to get detailed, so buckle up. Thank you guys so much for listening this far. And tune in next week. I'm really excited. I'll post these questions too in the description and see what you can come up with, and I'll share you my thoughts on them as well. But anyways, my name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.